Good morning, everyone. If you're joining us from the west coast of North America, a good afternoon, since we are now past a few minutes noon hour here in the Eastern Standard Time Zone. I'm very grateful that you are back from shoveling or battling the icy, wintry conditions, whether you are in Montreal, in Ontario, or in any nearby part of the United States. And of course, if you're joining us from Europe or from Israel, as our distinguished presenter today does, a beautiful good evening to you. My name is Csaba Nikolényi. I'm director of the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies and professor of political science at Concordia University here in Montreal. And it gives me truly such pleasure and joy to welcome back to our screen, unfortunately not in person, but hopefully next time, yes, also in person, a dear friend and colleague, Dr. Niva Golan-Nadir, who is going to share with us her insight, the results of her research about something extremely important, topical, and central in contemporary Israeli politics and society. The title of Niva's presentation is Balancing Faith and Duty, the Ultra-Orthodox Draft and its Implications for Israel's Military and Society. Now, as I mentioned, Niva is not a first-time presenter here at the Institute. We had the privilege of hosting her before, and we look forward to many, many more encounters in the future. Niva is a research associate at present at the Center for Policy Research of the Rockefeller College of Public Affairs and Policy at the State University of New York, SUNY Albany. She also is a research fellow at the Institute for Liberty and Responsibility at Israel's Reichman University. And at Reichman, she also teaches comparative politics and research methodology. In 2024, she was a visiting scholar at NYU's, New York University's Taub Center for Israel Studies. At present, she also serves as an Israel Institute visiting professor at Poland's Jagiellonian University. Niva's research focuses, broadly speaking, on comparative politics, and she has special interest and expertise in the study of Israel and Turkey, the relations between state and religion, Israel studies, and public administration. Niva explores in her work the persistent gaps that exist between public preferences on the one hand, and policy design and implementation on the other. Her most recent book, titled Public Preferences and Institutional Designs, Turkey and Israel, Israel and Turkey Compared, received a finalist designation and honorary mention in the annual Best Book Award competition organized under the auspices of the Azrieli Institute of Israel Studies and Concordia University's library. Niva, it's wonderful having us with you. Thank you for accepting the invitation. And now the screen is yours, at least for the next 35 to 40 minutes, to be followed by a Q&A from our audience. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Professor Nikolony, and thank you very much for hosting me again at the Azrieli Institute. I'm very, very happy to be here today. Specifically, I'm thrilled to talk about such an important issue within the Israeli society and polity since state establishment. What I would like to do is to talk about trends in Israeli society, public opinion, and I would like to present and perhaps unfold the stages and the specific critical junctures that have led to this society, military, and polity, this triangle of conflict when we're talking about ultra-Orthodox conscription to the IDF, namely the Israel Defense Forces. So, with no further ado, okay. So, just a little bit about democracy, about democratic theory before I actually start my talk today. I would like to just mention that if we're talking about a democratic process, and Israel indeed is defined as a Jewish and democratic state, when we are talking about a democratic process, we expect theoretically that institutional designs, when they lose their legitimacy, they, of course, will encounter civil dissatisfaction voiced in certain ways. And then we expect that institutions will change their policy. Of course, not always an overall change of policy is expected, but definitely at the fringes. But there are circumstances that lead to democratic deficits. In democratic deficits, we see that institutional designs, despite losing their legitimacy, are not faced by civil protest, even though there is a civil dissatisfaction with the policy itself. And this leads to what we call enduring gaps, gaps between the public's will, the public preferences, and the institutional design, namely the different policies. Why does this happen? This is mainly because policy barriers, most of them created at the critical juncture of state establishment. This specific barrier that I want to talk about in the Israeli case study is the status quo. Well, I would like to say agreement, but basically it is simply a letter. So when Israel, before it was established a few months earlier in 1947, David Ben-Gurion, then heading the Zionist movement in Europe, he wanted to show a unified front to the UN when asking for a state. He needed Agudat Israel, the ultra-Orthodox movement in Europe, side by side with him, agreeing to accept a state together, not leading to some kind of civil war and then not receiving the state. So basically what he did, he sent a letter to the head of the Agudat Israel back then. By the way, he was located in Palestine already. And he sent him a letter saying, when the new state will be established, what I can promise is that in four realms of policy, religion, the Jewish ultra-Orthodox stream of the Jewish religion, will be embedded in state institutions, in public state institutions. The realms were the Shabbat. This includes public transportation and commerce during this 26 hours from Friday evening to Saturday evening. Kashrut, kosher food, in accordance with Judaism. In the public sphere, of course, in Israel, everything is allowed in the public, in the private sphere, not at the public sphere. Marriage, there is only religious marriage in Israel. There's no civil marriage or any other kind of marriage. And education, each and every stream of the Jewish religion will have its own schools. So for the ultra-Orthodox, for secular, and for Zionist religion, a religious stream. So, despite that these were the four realms that were decided upon in this letter, basically many other policies are related to religion. In Israel, some of them, just a few, but there are many more, are burial, conversions to Judaism that are accordance to ultra-Orthodoxy, autopsy, and the topic that we're going to talk about today, conscription. The justification for all of these realms to be incorporated in public policy, as David Ben-Gurion then referred to it, he said, lest the house of Israel be divided in two. We don't want the house of Israel to be divided in two. Hence, despite being a secular individual, understanding that he's leading a secular movement, this was the decision and the compromise that was made back then. So a little bit of data if we're talking about Israeli society. So this is from the Israeli Central Bureau of Statistics. So basically nowadays there are roughly 73.5% Israelis that are affiliated as Jews. Talking about public opinion survey, we definitely see that there is a vast dissatisfaction with the Israeli policies that are incorporating religion in the public sphere. So roughly 60% of Israeli Jews are dissatisfied with these policies. And of course, we see that as level of religiosity increases, so dissatisfaction increases naturally. So roughly 90% of secular citizens are dissatisfied with these policies, roughly 50% of traditional, 16.7 religious, and of course, zero ultra-Orthodox, even though I have to mention that they have some dissatisfaction with the policy on marriage. Maybe we'll have the time to talk about that. So I would like to talk about the military conscription, this policy, as an enduring Jewish-Israeli conflict since state establishment. And why is this such a conflict? This is since with state establishment, basically only 400 yeshiva students were exempt by David Ben-Gurion from service. There are multiple reasons I will mention this, but today we have 80,000 ultra-Orthodox men that are exempt from service, and it is argued vastly that this should not be the case. What is the reason for such a great increase in numbers? As you can see, the official statistics of the state show that an ultra-Orthodox woman has an average 6.38 children, while the secular woman has roughly 2 children. Hence, this gap and the enduring number of ultra-Orthodox men that are simply not drafting to the army. A current public opinion survey asking citizens, what do you think? What is the appropriate solution in regards to drafting the ultra-Orthodox men? So you can see that the majority here, 45%, argue that conscription of ultra-Orthodox men is indeed what Israel should do. But yeah, you can reduce the number of outstanding full-time yeshiva students that they can be exempt and study the Torah, because we see that there is, we believe that there is a value in this. 29% believe that conscription of young Haredi men do not study Torah and just are registered to what we call dropout yeshiva. They simply were not successful in their schooling and they should be drafted. 19% argue that we should maintain the current situation, namely they should be exempt, but those that do feel that they want to enlist or they feel that they don't belong to the community, they should enlist. By the way, this does happen. As you can see, the Netzach Israel battalion, this is in the Kfir brigade. It is a battalion of Haredi ultra-Orthodox men that felt that they are not successful in the educational setting, and this is the way that they want to contribute to the state. 7% say they don't know. And why do I even mention this? 7% is, well, it's roughly, it's a decent answer. It's not that high, but it was very high just a few years back. Before the Swords of Iron War, you could even see surveys with 20% arguing they don't know what we should do with this. But now there is definitely more solid public opinion as to this argument. So to understand exactly how to untangle this situation, what we should do, how did this come to be, we need to understand the process of this political and social debate about conscription. So I would like to start with 1948, as David Ben-Gurion, then the first Prime Minister of Israel, granted draft exemptions to the 400 ultra-Orthodox yeshiva, the Torah seminary students, under this title as Torah as a vocation, a craft. This was his argument, as you can see already in February 48, so before state establishment, 3 months before, he sent this to the chief rabbinate of Israel and Agudat Israel, and he told them, we exempt these students, but only if they actually study. If they don't study, we ask them to join the IDF. And also, by the way, there's a request here that they learn self-defense in order to defend themselves in the coming threats that he knew the state would have. So what are the reasons for exempting these 400 yeshiva students? So first of all, it was to rebuild the tradition of the Torah study in Israel after the Holocaust. Most of the yeshiva students were murdered during the Holocaust. They then, of course, really represented a very small percentage of the population. It seemed a very limited number. It was the great political pragmatism of David Ben-Gurion. This is the way he initiated the state, with pragmatism, securing the religious parties, the support during the formative years. He definitely saw this as a temporary policy, and each year he argued that this should be under review to see if we need them or we don't need them. There was, of course, also economic justifications. They knew that the ultra-Orthodox men were not really productive when we're talking about the economy. So, and the military was definitely reluctant from having them joining the organization. And also moral justifications. Definitely, the Torah study was framed as a spiritual contribution. At state establishment, everyone had a contribution to the common good. So there was the political contribution, the defense contribution, the spiritual contribution. By the way, women had the demographic contribution, having more babies in order to contribute to the collective good. There were so many reasons, and this was a part of it. And this decision indeed laid the ground for what we see today, over roughly 7 decades later. In 1958, 10 years later, by the way, almost all great, solid Israeli laws were actually enacted during the 50s. It took a while to start enacting the laws. The arrangement was actually institutionalized by Shimon Peres as the Director General of the Ministry of Defense. But at this time, 10 years after, Ben-Gurion already regretted doing this. He said, this is, first of all, a great moral question. If it is appropriate that the son of a certain mother be killed for the defense of the homeland, and the son of another mother sits in his room and studies safely when most of Israel's young people risk their souls in death. Okay, so 10 years later, his decision was actually really institutionalized, and now he regrets this. But then came 1977, and for the first time, the Likud right-wing party is now in government. Menachem Begin's government expands the exemptions to be completely wide and general. Almost every religious person could say that Torah is craft and he will not join the army. He increased the number of the yeshiva students and really formalized the agreement. He said this was the price paid by the Likud for seeking to form a narrow coalition, a minimum winning coalition, including Agudat Israel. And this really laid the ground to the great conflict because it was highly, highly exaggerated. And then 20 years, 2 decades have passed. And then the High Court, this was the Rubinstein case, criticizes the lack of legal framework regarding the yeshiva draft exemptions and calls for a legislative regulation. From now on, 1998, we see the High Court and the government and the Knesset clashing about this issue. Committees being formed, laws being enacted, a pushback by the High Court saying this is not constitutional at the end of the day, going back to legislation and still not able to actually enact a law in this regard. So in 2002, this is a highly important point here, the Tal law creates a pathway for ultra-Orthodox men to enter the military or national service, another kind of contribution, at the age of 22. And this law, by the way, the government was Ehud Barak's government, so it was a left-wing government. The law was widely criticized for being actually really ineffective. it was very hard to actually make this happen. And a decade later, the High Court invalidates the Tal law, citing inequality. So since 2012, the inequality in burden phrase, this phrase in protesting against non-conscription, has begun to really take form and establish itself. So inequality in military conscription, namely non-constitutional. Also, back then, was the first actual major protest. They call it the suckers protest. There were reserve duties, men and women, and also people with interest to have this policy changed. It was led by them, led by students, and this was for the first time 35,000 people were demonstrating against the non-conscription of the ultra-Orthodox men. So 2 years later, the Knesset passes what we call the equal burden law. This was the terminology since then, introducing gradual conscription targets and sanctions for non-compliance. This was a Benjamin Netanyahu government, but it was a wider coalition with more central left parties, and it did not include the religious parties at all. So the implementation did have its political delays. And of course, obviously, just 1 year later, this government did not stand for much longer, and Netanyahu formed another government just a year later, but this time with the religious parties, and removed almost all sanctions from the equal burden law. And then, just as I've mentioned a few minutes back, the High Court strikes again, strike down the 2015 amendment, demanding new legislation to address conscription inequalities. By 2020, the military really remains the same. There's no drafting of Haredi men whatsoever, and it's below targets amid the social and political debate over the enforcement. And the great debate, really, and critical juncture around this Swords of Iron War begins when the security service law and all other ordinances that actually embedded the idea of non-conscription of the ultra-Orthodox men all expired. They all expired, and since July 2023, and since then, there is no legal framework for not drafting the ultra-Orthodox men. Hence, they are under the same law, just like secular soldiers, only that if a secular man will not go and draft, he will go to jail immediately. And if the Haredi men will, this will most likely will not happen, even though it's more complicated than that, but there's a lot of pushback. So we're talking about 2023. Israeli society is torn apart, and this is because of the judicial reform, also with the topic of conscription embedded here, and there are great demonstrations all around the world, all around the country, and you have counter demonstrations from the right-wing supporters, and well, the country is really at its low. And then October 7th arrived, the great surprise of a Saturday morning. And this is when there's a great turn in the debate over conscription. This is because there are a lot of consequences because of the war. What happened is that the army urgently needs, and it's really hard to find the data. We usually find it when the chief of staff visits the Knesset or actually approaching the topic via the media and explains exactly what is missing when we are talking about manpower. So the army urgently needs an addition of 12,000 soldiers, and 7,000 of them have to be in combat roles. 923 died in battle since the beginning of the war. Roughly 14,000 are disabled physically and mentally. if I may add, if you go around campuses all around the country, you see you see these disabled soldiers. They're young men, they're all disabled, and this is the new reality that the society is facing. The number is an addition to the combat soldiers that the army needs anyhow each year. So this is just extra. On average, reservists served about 136 days, like a third of a year since the war started, compared with only 8 days if we're talking about 2022, before the war. And then the numbers of ultra-Orthodox men actually drafting are really low, a few hundreds, 9% maybe, out of the actual numbers that could enlist. So we don't have a conscription law since July 2023, and we do not have any framework, and we are in great institutional organizational need for combat soldiers and soldiers generally. And what we see right now is that there's a recent legislation versus the actual necessity. And the legislation is actually well, it is initiated by the right-wing Likud party that has been holding this narrow coalition with the religious parties that are sanctioning decision-making at the government and Knesset level if the government will actually approve a very harsh conscription law. And when we're talking about actually what are we dealing with here, we're talking about incentives, we're talking about sanctions, and we're talking about quotas. These are the dimensions, if you may, that the different laws are playing with. What will be better for the Haredi community, and what will be better for the secular community. So the defense minister, Katz, you can see him in the center of the photo, argues that to begin conscripting 50% of eligible Haredim in 7 years. So we are talking about just 50%, and in 7 years. And you can see that the head of personnel division of the IDF saying, we need combat soldiers now. You can't postpone the recruitment for 7 years when the reserves are collapsing. And when we're saying they're collapsing, we're actually having people losing their jobs, losing their families, and mentally struggling because of the war. And they are sent more and more requests and demands to give more days to the state. So at the time when the ultra-Orthodox community are actually getting so many exemptions. You can see exemption at the age of 26, and other laws actually reduce these numbers, and in 7 years, and only 50%. At the same time, the reserve duty age is actually increased by 1 year. Namely, if a man could actually cease his reserve duty at the age of 42, now he has to carry on until 43. And the mandatory service is increased in 3 months for the next 5 years. And I can tell you that the chief of staff just this morning said if it will not even be longer, the IDF will be non-operational. They have to have these numbers drafted or to actually add more time to their service now. And this is a great Israeli debate. As you can see, this is civil society organization. The name is Free Israel. It actually deals with issues of religion and state. And he's saying only at the Netanyahu's government, we see that the Haredis are exempt, but the warriors are just, they demand more and more time from their lives. Now, after the former law that I've just presented seemed a bit harsh for the prime minister and the government, they've actually replaced the member of Knesset responsible for it, who was Yuli Edelstein, and now it's Boaz Bismuth, that actually really made the law even more at ease towards the ultra-Orthodox. You can see it's by June 2027, 81,000 Ultra-Orthodox men will be drafted, and the sanctions are really light, like to deny new driving licenses and not actually imprisonment, like a secular man will be demanded of, and then a permanent exemption at 26. And there's so many small details that if you actually study and understand each and every point in the content, you will understand just how simply ineffective these laws are. I would just finally want to talk a little bit about civil society. There are protests all around for equal burden, the burden of serving the country. And you can see that people are at side roads and bridges arguing that unity is equality, and that only together we can stop this draft evasion drill that the government, so they say, is imposing upon us. And on the other hand, the Ultra-Orthodox are protesting as well. They're stopping roads, surprisingly, and then you're just simply stuck in the middle of a highway for hours because the Haredim are stopping and saying, we rather die than join the army. We will not draft. This will definitely kill us. This is also a great existential tragedy. This young boy was killed just a few days back during a protest. He was hit by a bus that, arguably did not see was on the way. And just yesterday, his father said that if I had two options, having him drafted or die at this protest, I'd rather have him dead. So this is how acute this idea of not joining the army. This is an ideology, and it is simply tearing the Israeli society apart. There are also hotlines and instructions on how to avoid the draft. By the way, they can be sanctioned for 5 years imprisonment for arguing and helping people break the law, but this happens all across. Looking forward, what can be done in order to bridge this? It has to be very detailed, and it has to be very, very sensitive. As to the institutions, the military needs ultra-Orthodox soldiers, and the military needs them now. There are still ongoing battles, and there are still ongoing, chances that the war will be renewed. But the implementation is complex. I did not even get the chance in an hour just to talk about also the complexity of actually joining them into the overall institution that has to adjust itself as well. We see the High Court that argued that exemptions are no longer constitutional and will not accept this. The politicians, if we're going to approach also the angle of the agency, they pose a hardship. They prioritize the gains of the narrow coalition with the ultra-Orthodox parties. They have a lot of power together. Civil society, bottom up, the protests, the arrangements, and overall government. It is not just conscription. It is the overall arrangements of the government that civil society is protesting against. Also, the ultra-Orthodox community. This is basically against their lifestyle, and they have a multicultural arrangement that they want to be kept intact. Individuals, by the way, that do decide to draft, also because they feel that after what happened during October 7th, they owe this to the country, and it's not fair that only secular soldiers are dead protecting their country. Well, they're ostracized by their families. You can find them on weekends sleeping on benches because after drafting, they have nowhere else to go. So there's also the overall framework. The war is simply an existential necessity. It abolishes all the past institutional arrangements, namely all the promises made by David Ben-Gurion and then institutionalized during the 50s that I've mentioned. This is a classical power sharing decision to be made in Israel, which is definitely a divided society on religious grounds. And the veto decision cannot be maintained. This is something that will have to reach an overall social political understanding, because otherwise the state will simply not be able to recover from everything that has happened in the past 2 years. So thank you very much.
Niva, thank you very much for this very crisp, clear presentation about a very complex and at the same time very, very important issue. While you were busy restarting your connection, we had a couple of very important questions that were shared, and I did promise with members of the audience who asked these questions to prioritize them when you come back. So let me start with those, and then in the meantime, let me again invite everyone in the audience to please keep putting your questions, comments, concerns, anything that you want to have discussed into the chat box. So we had a question about rabbinic leadership. Can you comment about the positive as well as the negative role that the ultra-Orthodox rabbinic leaders play in this process? On the one hand, and this was the way in which the question was specifically formulated, because of the tremendous authority and clout they have over their followers, one would imagine that it should be easy enough to resolve this issue by getting them on board, i.e., the rabbis. On the other hand, and I nuanced it in our conversation that we had while you were busy fixing the internet, I tend to see the ultra-Orthodox rabbinic leadership as more of a problem rather than a path to the solution. So could you comment on communal rabbinic authority and leadership in this context? And another question, and this was a question from Florida. The second question is from a dear colleague in India who is joining us live. And Dr. Kumar's question had to do with whether we could see and understand the unresolved issue about the Haredi conscription as part of the still unresolved debate about the identity of Israel as a Jewish or democratic state. So let me leave those for now, and then I will pick up more questions as we go along.
So thank you very much. These are great questions. First of all, it's interesting that it is very unified. I've started by saying that many policies are actually dependent upon these arrangements made at state establishment, but also the way that they are resolved or managed or not managed is basically the same. If we're talking about marriage, or we're talking about commerce or transportation on Shabbat, or if we're talking about conscription. So as to the rabbinic leadership, well, basically, when you ask in public opinion surveys, you ask if you are now serving in the army, the ultra-Orthodox men, you're serving in the army, and you have your commander's order or your rabbi's order clashing, who would you listen to? And most of them say they would listen to the rabbi. And this is why this is a problem, because the orders do not overlap. They come from different ideologies and perceptions. Hence, when you are a soldier, you're the property of the state, by the way. This is the way that you're defined. So definitely those more extreme leaders, they argue, no, we will not change anything. So yes, this poses a hardship. But I have to say at the same time, you can find amazing, more moderate rabbis that look for peace, look for agreement, unity, and equality. And they're saying there are ways to do that. Some of them are even saying, well, there are roughly 65% of the Israeli Jews saying that they also want civil marriage. We can actually do that as well. And there are arrangements that are allowed by the halacha. But the majority of the rabbis definitely do not allow this. And this is why they pose hardship. So is this a part of the conflict about religion and state? Definitely, yes. It's a great question. It is one conflict just out of so many that Israeli Jews are encountering in their day-to-day lives, and also in critical life cycle ceremonies that they have to approach religious authority in order to maintain. This is a part of incorporating religious arrangements into official modern state institutions.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Professor Lihi Ben-Shitrit from NYU. And you would like, I think you would like to ask directly, so please go ahead. Corey, if you could please unmute Professor Ben-Shitrit, that would be great. Thanks. Thank you, Corey.
Hi, Professor Golan-Nadir. I'm so excited to attend your talk, and it's such an important subject, so timely, and you gave a great overview. I have a question for you actually about the liberal kind of public or the secular public objection to the exemption. I'm wondering, a liberal perspective will talk about conscientious objection, right? A path to conscientious objection to religious and non-religious Israeli conscripts. And I have not heard so much of that as a pathway in the Israeli kind of liberal public discourse. Have you heard something like that? Are there organizations or parties or groups that are talking about basically making exemption based on conscientious objection just available to everyone on an equal basis?
Thank you, Professor Ben-Shitrit. This is a wonderful question. The liberal public argues that there should be equality, the equality in burden, and in Israel, there is no other justification, basically, in order to invade drafting. Definitely, women can say that they are, for religious reasons, they want to be released from military service, so they actually go and do some other civil service, but they also contribute in this way. With this justification is definitely not a part of the Israeli reality. There is no liberal public, and there are liberal civil society organizations, definitely, but this is not a part of their arguments that someone should be exempt. Basically, the security necessity, along with the harm the secular public and the religious Zionist public are now experiencing, and for decades have experienced because of ongoing wars, is something that will make this kind of liberal argument hard to sustain. So I believe.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Next, we have Mr. Liam Doran from Concordia. Please.
Hi, very good presentation. I was wondering, you mentioned earlier you were discussing the difference in the punishment for draft dodging in Israel between the ultra-Orthodox communities and the regular reservists. Like a month or two ago, I was listening to a podcast where it was these scholars, French scholars, who I think had just returned from Israel. They were conducting a survey of the French military, and they were at one point they were discussing this issue, and they were saying that tensions were increasing as time went on because it seemed that the public support for the continuation of the war was dropping. However, from their perspective, it seemed as though it was still higher in the ultra-Orthodox communities, who were also at the same time against being drafted in the military. But they were also saying that because of this, it was leading to an increase in draft dodging within the ultra-Orthodox communities. But they also did mention that because of this, the military was a little bit less harshly pursuing those people because they were aware of the political issues that were going on in Israel. In your opinion, like, is this correct, or would you say that they're still very much more they're still very strictly going after draft dodging in the non ultra-Orthodox communities?
Oh, so thank you. It's a very interesting question, and it's really nice to hear that that also other scholars are working on this topic. Basically, the ultra-Orthodox public is not embedded or preoccupied with these topics. Indeed, there were times when at the fringes of the community, we have seen ultra-Orthodox representatives joining the army in supportive roles like medicine, like social welfare. And so we definitely have seen these kinds of supports, but they don't, because of the fact that they don't want the spotlight on them in regards to conscription. You will not actually see them trying and initiating a public regard or display or discourse about the topic, about the war. So they don't really express or don't express their support or non-support in the continuation of the war. This is something that is definitely outside their zeitgeist.
Thank you very much. So I see three more hands. Liam, okay, that's an old hand. I will probably draw the line there just to make sure that we can wrap up in a timely manner. So next in line will be Zara.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I have a question. So basically, when we're looking at a concept similar to obviously Carl Schmitt of the concept of the political, as we know, we see that there's a state legitimacy that rests on a clear definition of who belongs to the collective friend. So by allowing a significant minority as the Haredim to opt out of the ultimate sacrifice of the friend, meaning the military service, is the state inadvertently facilitating an internal friend-enemy distinction? And how do we prevent this us versus them theory from eroding the social fabric to a point where secular and religious Israelis view each other not as fellow citizens, but as existential threats to their representative survival?
Wonderful question.
Wonderful question. Thank you, Zara. Thank you very much for this question. So I'm quite fond of the theory of Carl Schmitt. And what is so interesting about this theory is the one who decides upon the exception is actually the sovereign. So the government is the one to decide upon the exception. So the exception would be, this is a time of an existential threat. We need more soldiers, so the ultra-Orthodox men should be conscripted. But the sovereign, actually, when deciding upon the exception, you would say the foe is actually the secular public who wants the Haredi men to be drafted. Because as we can see in coalition agreements and in this debate of this very, very weak law that we understand will not initiate many new combat soldiers or soldiers whatsoever. So you would say, the us versus them is actually changing its role here, because the them already is not the ultra-Orthodox because they're a part of the government. But if we're talking about the social understanding of us versus them, which is basically not really what Schmitt was talking about, because he was talking about the political, but definitely you can see the divide between the two. What's interesting is that if we look at the fertility rates and if we look about demographic in a few decades, ultra-Orthodox will be a majority in the country, and this will be a very interesting thing to to see what will happen to the different policies. Maybe the ones that are now more secular will become more religious, and definitely what will be the future of the IDF or the country as a whole.
Thank you very much, Niva. Next in line, we have Beth Dwoskin, please.
Hi, thank you. I thought your presentation was fabulous. I learned a lot. Thanks. One thing I haven't, that you didn't address and that I don't see that often, I'm trying to find people talking about it, is why doesn't the public agitate to remove the subsidies that the non-Orthodox or that the ultra-Orthodox get? It's almost like they're being rewarded for not serving. They are in effect rewarded more than their Arabs who also don't serve and don't get the same benefit. And it seems like a more humane solution, because if you're not getting your subsidies, then you've got to do something like work maybe or serve or something. I just don't see that much about it.
Thank you, Beth. Very important point. Niva?
Yes, thank you very much, Beth. Great point. And I have to say, this is discussed all the time by the opposition to the government and by civil society. This is the immediate argument that all the tax money is going to the Haredi schools, going to the family, to the yeshivas, and the sanctions, by the way, the sanctions on those that are not drafted in every initiated new law of conscription is definitely based upon limiting the subsidies that they get. Okay, but I just want to give a footnote here. They live in great poverty. They rely on welfare. Okay, so this is something that if Professor Ben-Shitrit before mentioned humanist liberal understandings, so I believe that the secular community is in a way understanding that despite that this is basically a trap, because it goes on in circles. You don't work, so you're poor, so you rely on welfare, so you need the subsidies. Yes, this is a vicious circle, but definitely people are saying this is simply unfair. We pay, we serve, they don't, and they get the subsidies and they don't serve. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last question will go to Michael Perko. Corey, can you please thank you.
Yes.
Hello, Professor Golan-Nadir. By way of introduction, I am a semi-retired professor from Loyola University in Chicago, and I spent 20 years studying Tzahal as an Israel studies professor, and including as a Fulbright scholar at Bar-Ilan. Here's my question. You've talked about this from the perspective of civil society, of secular society. What different strains of opinion are there within the leadership of Tzahal? For example, when I was studying Tzahal, I got to be fairly close friends with Elazar Stern, who is a name I suspect you recognize from being in government, but he was also chief education officer for a time and was the first person coming from a Dati background, a modern Orthodox background. So my question is, what strains are there across the political spectrum, not within the civil society, but within the leadership of Tzahal about these very important issues that you mentioned? And it was a wonderful presentation, by the way. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, thank you very much. So I would like to address this from two points. So first of all, it's really interesting that Benjamin Netanyahu has actually appointed Eyal Zamir as the new chief of staff. Mm-hmm. And the first thing that this chief of staff said is that all Israel are responsible for one another and they should be drafted into the army. This is the first thing the chief of staff has said, and he is arguing this constantly. Within the army itself, of course, as we know, the army should be very representative of the state and should be very mamlachti. So, of course, we do not hear officially a lot of inside information. It's very secretive. You almost get no information, only via soldiers telling their families, telling the media. This is how we know that something happened. I do know, and this is one of the research that I do right now about religiosity within the organization of the army. I can tell you that many of the commanders, there's a tendency of religiosity within the organization itself. I can say that the conclusion that we've come to in this research is that both more secular soldiers and more religious Zionist soldiers, they both feel equally discriminated against by the military. Hence, protecting the stability of the institution, not because they're satisfied, but because they're dissatisfied. Hence, having one group not feeling disadvantage over the other actually preserves institutional stability, is the consequence from this study. So the topic of conscription is not something we hear about from inside the organization, but the conflict, and this is a public opinion survey I've actually done here as well, you can definitely see that Israelis are feeling in both sides of the religious spectrum, they feel discriminated against by the military.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. While I did say that Michael's will be the last question, I would like to take the opportunity to also voice mine or put a question from my interest to you, Niva. It was a wonderful presentation, and I cannot echo the praise that you heard already before. Very, very insightful and educational. But it does approach the problem as a Jewish problem and not an Israeli problem. The only politician that I keep hearing looking at it differently is Avigdor Lieberman, who says the question shouldn't be about which Jew to draft and which Jew not to draft. If you're a citizen, you come into the army. Now, that seems to be, it's a very minority view that certainly doesn't get much discussed in the headlines. If you're a Knesset junkie, you do pick it up. Why?
So why don't we hear more about this perspective?
Well, I can imagine. Yes, but why don't we frame this more as a question of citizenship?
So this will make,
in which case, the Arab citizens of Israel, says Lieberman, should be also drafted the way as all the Jewish citizens should be drafted. And of course, the legal framework is not there, right? Because it's a different exception that it's a different legal framework that gives them the Arab citizens an exception. But Lieberman says we need to change that. So where does this figure in sort of the more liberal citizenship-oriented discourse?
Okay, so this is a great question. And of course, naturally, a very complex question. So if we're saying the only conflict that we're going to touch on right now, as I did in my talk today, would be at the micro level within the Jewish community. But we're saying, of course, we have the Druze community that are a part of the IDF and have contributed so much to the country. But still, there's the law of nationality, and they are outside the law of nationality. And this is a great, great debate and a great protest and a great heartache for many, many Israeli Jews that their Druze brothers are not there, but they fought next to them, but they are not defined as a part of the collective. So before, what your question is basically challenging is, before we're talking about this topic, we need to decide who is the collective. Who is the Israeli collective? And this is a great question. Who can contribute to the collective good? And this is something that, of course, Israel is debating for years. But with time, the more conservative ideology politically, and the rule for roughly 18 years of right-wing political conservative parties, along with ongoing wars and economic difficulties, by the way, as well. We don't even get a chance to talk about. There is almost no space to talk about this great question of who are the Israelis and who can contribute to this institution that is basically IDF, Israel Defense Forces, not Jewish Israelis Defense Forces. Okay, so this is a great question, and it is about the definition of the collective, and if you may, going back, who are us and who's them? Okay, so this is definitely a great conversation to have. So thank you for this insightful question.
Well, Niva, thank you so much for entertaining all these different questions and ideas coming from all over the intellectual spectrum. And this is now my time and opportunity to thank you again profusely for not only preparing and delivering a stellar presentation, but doing it under such pressure. My goodness, losing the internet, coming back, and then still holding your and standing your ground like this. Kol hakavod. This is you're really setting a very, very beautiful example. So thank you, Niva, for everything that you've done. Before I would say goodbye to you and to members of the audience, I would like to ask Corey to put up a couple of slides on the screen to share with you some important information about upcoming lectures, one of which will be in person only. We are having a number of in-person events in Montreal. Both lectures are delivered by our visitor, Professor Nathan Aridan, whom we are grateful to be able to bring to Concordia in collaboration with Ben-Gurion University, the Canadian Associates of Ben-Gurion University. And both talks that he will be giving are marking two important anniversaries. So on February 3rd, he will be addressing the 65th anniversary of the famous Toynbee-Herzog debate, when Herzog, the uncle of the current president, served as consul general here in Montreal. He engaged in a very heated debate, intellectually heated debate with the late Professor Arnold Toynbee about the identity and the nature of the Jewish people, a debate that was very closely covered by the Montreal Jewish community. Many members of our local community still remember it with well, some with fondness, but certainly it's very much alive in our collective memory here in Montreal. And then Nathan's second presentation will be dedicated, if you will, to talking about the Sinai War of 1956, another important anniversary that from Israeli political history, of course, we all know so well. So if you are in Montreal, and that we will be able to share also on Zoom. So if you're in Montreal, or if you have time to join us for the next set of presentations, we always look forward to welcoming you either on screen or in person. Please sign up to make sure that you get our newsletters so that you could be part of fascinating topical discussions such as the one that we had this wonderful opportunity to hear from Professor Niva Golan-Nadir. Niva, we wish you best of luck and a wonderful continuation of the semester. And we look forward to having you back with us before long.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you very much.